Chapter 1. The offer. Nick Henderson had never considered himself a man prone to whimsy. He liked things that made sense, blueprints, safety protocols, schedules that ran like clockwork. His life was a series of neat boxes, each labeled and stacked in order: work, gym, groceries, sleep, repeat. It wasn't glamorous, but it was predictable, and predictability was safe. Until March. The email had landed in his inbox like a snowflake in July. Unexpected, oddly cheerful, and impossible to ignore. The subject line read, "Exclusive contract opportunity. Immediate response requested." Nick almost deleted it, assuming it was spam, but something about the sender's domain, an obscure consultancy he vaguely recognized, made him pause. The terms were unusual. He was to oversee the modernization of an existing production facility, streamline operations, and bring safety measures up to code. Nothing strange there. That was his bread and butter. But then came the kicker. All modern technology capable of recording audio, video, or data is strictly prohibited. No phone, no laptop, no smartwatch. He'd be working blind like it was 1985. Nick leaned back in his chair, rereading the compensation package for the 5th time. It was generous, absurdly so. People didn't throw around that kind of money unless they were hiding something. Whether that something was good or bad was yet to be determined. He rubbed his jaw, staring at the ceiling of his apartment. "Either this is the weirdest scam ever," he muttered, "or I'm about to walk into a James Bond villain's lair." The truth was, Nick didn't have much holding him back. His calendar was open for the next few months, and the thought of doing something, anything, different tugged at him like a persistent child. He'd spent years chasing contracts, climbing ladders, and somewhere along the way, he'd stopped noticing how quiet his life had become. Friends drifted, family calls grew infrequent, and holidays were just another day to catch up on paperwork. Maybe that was why he said yes. A week later, Nick stood in the lobby of his apartment building, staring at the man who had come to collect him. The guy looked like he'd stepped out of a corporate espionage thriller. Sleek black suit, polished shoes, expression carved from granite. And then there was the hat. A bright red Santa Claus hat, complete with jingle bells that chimed merrily every time he moved. Nick blinked. "You, lost a bet?" The man's lips twitched, almost a smile. "Contract stipulation," he said, voice smooth as glass. "Festive attire required." Nick opened his mouth, then closed it. "Right, of course." He glanced at the man's gloved hands gripping a leather briefcase. "You're not going to make me wear one, are you?" "Not yet," the man replied cryptically, then gestured toward the waiting car. A sleek black sedan that looked wildly out of place with a wreath tied to the grille. Nick slid into the back seat, his duffel bag beside him. He'd packed light. Work boots, jeans, flannel shirts, and a dog-eared copy of Industrial Safety Standards. His phone and laptop sat on his kitchen counter, abandoned like guilty secrets. The contract had been clear, no tech. He felt naked without them. The ride to the airport was silent except for the occasional jingle of bells. Nick tried small talk once. "So, how long have you been doing this?" But the man's answer was a single word: long. After that, Nick gave up and stared out the window, wondering if he'd lost his mind. The airport wasn't an airport, at least not one Nick recognized. They bypassed the main terminal entirely, pulling up to a private hangar where a plane waited like a Christmas card come to life. Bright red fuselage, golden wingtips, and Nick squinted, a silhouette of a flying reindeer painted on the tail. He laughed under his breath. "Okay, this is officially the weirdest Tuesday of my life." The man in the Santa hat didn't react. He popped the trunk, retrieved Nick's bag, and began rifling through it with clinical precision. Then came the scanner, a sleek device Nick had never seen before, humming softly as it swept over him from head to toe. "Seriously," Nick said, raising his arms. "You're making TSA look lazy." "Protocol," the man replied. "No unauthorized technology." Nick bit back a retort. When the man finally nodded, satisfied, they boarded the plane. Inside, it was all polished wood and plush seats, with garlands strung along the cabin walls like someone had raided a holiday aisle and gone wild. A faint scent of cinnamon hung in the air. Nick sank into a seat, exhaling slowly. "What the hell have I signed up for?" He stared out the window as the plane taxied, then lifted into the sky. Below, the city shrank to a patchwork of gray and glass. Nick closed his eyes, exhaustion tugging at him. His thoughts drifted, past the spreadsheets and safety audits, past the empty apartment waiting for him back home. He remembered being 4 years old, counting the minutes until Santa came, leaving out cookies and milk, believing in magic because it felt good to believe. Somewhere along the way, he'd stopped. The hum of the engines lulled him, and Nick fell asleep wondering what kind of job started with a Santa hat and a reindeer plane. He woke to a gentle jolt as the plane touched down. Blinking against the light, Nick peered out the window and froze. Snow. Endless, glittering snow stretching to the horizon. And there, nestled like a jewel in the white expanse, was a building so cheery it made his teeth ache. Red and green trim, wreaths on every door, strings of lights twinkling like stars. A towering sign read, "Welcome to Christmas Town." Nick stared. People who still have Christmas decorations up in March, he muttered, are either really dedicated or clinically insane. The plane rolled to a stop beside the building. Nick's pulse quickened, a mix of curiosity and something he couldn't name. He had no idea his life had just taken a sharp turn into complete insanity, the best kind. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that his new employer wasn't just eccentric. He was jolly old Saint Nick. Chapter 2. The flight and arrival at Christmastown. Nick had never been on a private jet before. He'd imagined sleek chrome interiors, champagne flutes, and maybe a flight attendant who looked like they belonged in a magazine spread. What he got instead was Christmas exploded at 30,000 feet. The cabin was a riot of holiday cheer. Garlands draped along the walls, twinkling lights framing the windows, and a faint scent of cinnamon and peppermint that made Nick feel like he'd stepped into a gingerbread house. Even the safety cards had holly printed on them. He half expected the oxygen masks to come down with little Santa beards attached. He dropped into a plush seat upholstered in deep green velvet and stared at the wreath hanging over the cockpit door. "This is festive," he said aloud, because silence felt heavier than the snow outside. The man in the Santa hat, Nick had mentally nicknamed him Agent Jingle Bells, didn't respond. He sat across the aisle, expression unreadable, hat jingling softly every time he shifted. Nick wondered if the guy had a sense of humor buried somewhere under all that stoicism. Probably not. Nick buckled in, trying to ignore the knot of nerves in his stomach. He was a man who liked control, and right now he had none. No phone, no laptop, no idea where he was going. Just a contract that sounded like something out of a conspiracy theory and a plane that looked like Rudolph had designed it. The engines roared to life, and Nick felt the familiar press of acceleration as the jet surged forward. He glanced out the window, watching the city shrink beneath a gray March sky. His apartment was down there somewhere, quiet, predictable, safe. He wondered if he'd miss it. Probably not. The flight smoothed out quickly, the hum of the engines settling into a steady rhythm. Nick leaned back, exhaling slowly. He tried to distract himself by counting the ornaments strung along the overhead compartments. 32, all glittering gold, but his mind kept circling back to the contract. No tech, no questions, generous pay. It all screamed classified project. But what kind of classified project involved Christmas decorations in March? He closed his eyes, exhaustion tugging at him. His thoughts drifted to childhood. Those nights he'd stayed up late, listening for sleigh bells, leaving out cookies and milk because magic felt real back then. He smiled faintly, remembering the thrill of believing. Somewhere along the way he'd stopped. The hum of the engines lulled him deeper, and Nick fell asleep wondering if he'd wake up in a snow globe. A gentle jolt stirred him. Nick blinked, disoriented. As the plane touched down with a smooth bump, he rubbed his eyes and peered out the window, and froze. Snow. Endless, glittering snow stretching to the horizon like a sheet of diamonds. And there, nestled in the white expanse, was a town straight out of a holiday movie. Candy cane lampposts lined cobblestone streets. Strings of lights twinkled overhead. Buildings painted in cheerful reds and greens huddled together like gingerbread houses, each crowned with a puff of smoke curling from its chimney. At the center stood a sprawling structure so festive it made Nick's teeth ache, arched windows glowing warm, wreaths on every door, and a towering sign that read, "Welcome to Christmas Town." Nick stared, mouth dry. "People who still have Christmas decorations up in March," he muttered, "are either really dedicated or clinically insane." The plane rolled to a stop beside the building. Outside, figures bustled through the snow, short figures, bundled in bright coats, their laughter carrying faintly through the glass. Nick squinted. Were those pointy hats? Before he could process that, Agent Jingle Bells stood, hat jingling merrily as he retrieved Nick's bag. "Time to disembark," he said, voice as smooth and unreadable as before. Nick unbuckled slowly, his pulse quickening. He followed the man down the narrow aisle, past garlands and ornaments, and stepped out into air so crisp it felt like biting into an apple. Snowflakes danced on the wind, settling on his jacket like tiny stars. The cold hit him, sharp and clean, but it wasn't unpleasant. It smelled like pine and sugar cookies, like every Christmas morning he'd ever loved. For a moment, Nick just stood there, boots crunching in the snow, staring at the impossible scene before him. He had no idea his life had just taken a sharp turn into complete insanity, the best kind. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that his new employer wasn't just eccentric. He was jolly old Saint Nick. Chapter 3. Welcome to Christmas Town. Nick followed Agent Jingle Bells across the snow, boots crunching in rhythm with the faint jingle of bells from the man's hat. The cold nipped at his cheeks, but the air smelled so clean, pine and sugar cookies, like nostalgia bottled and poured into the wind. Ahead, the sprawling building loomed, glowing warm against the white expanse. It looked like someone had taken every Christmas movie set ever made and mashed them together into one architectural fever dream. The double doors swung open before they reached them, releasing a wave of heat and the scent of cinnamon so strong Nick almost groaned. Inside was a riot of color, garlands draped along polished beams, wreaths hung on every wall, and a chandelier made entirely of crystal snowflakes glittering overhead. Somewhere in the distance, faint music played, cheerful and bright. Nick stepped inside, blinking against the sensory overload. Wow, he muttered. Subtlety is dead. Agent Jingle Bells didn't react. He handed Nick's duffel to a waiting attendant. An attendant who was, Nick realized with a jolt, about 3 feet tall and wearing a green tunic with a belt that jingled when they moved. The hat was pointy. The ears were not human. Nick stared. Is that? Yes, the man said smoothly, cutting him off before the question could fully form. Follow me. Nick obeyed because what else could he do? He trailed the man down a corridor lined with portraits, jolly figures in red suits, snowy landscapes, reindeer mid-flight. The air was warm, humming with energy, and Nick felt something strange stirring in his chest. Excitement? Wonder? He wasn't sure, but it was better than the dull ache he'd carried for years. They stopped before a set of carved doors, each panel etched with scenes of sleighs and stars. Agent Jingle Bells pushed them open, and Nick stepped into a room that looked like the inside of a snow globe, fire crackling in a stone hearth, plush chairs arranged around a rug patterned with holly leaves, and at the far end, a desk piled high with papers. And was that a plate of cookies? Behind the desk stood a man. A big man. Broad shoulders, round belly, beard white as fresh snow. His red suit gleamed, trimmed in fur so soft it looked like clouds. His eyes twinkled, actually twinkled, and his smile was warm enough to melt glaciers. Nick's brain short-circuited. He knew that face. Everyone knew that face. Nick Henderson, the man boomed, voice rich and rolling like thunder wrapped in laughter. Welcome, welcome. We've been expecting you. Nick opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. You're... He stopped, because saying it out loud felt insane. You're kidding. The man laughed, a sound so deep and jolly it vibrated in Nick's bones. I assure you, young man, I am not kidding, though I do enjoy a good joke. He rounded the desk with surprising agility for someone his size and clapped Nick on the shoulder, nearly knocking him off balance. Santa Claus at your service. Nick stared, words failing him. His rational brain screamed that this was impossible, but his senses told a different story. The warmth of the fire, the scent of pine, the twinkle in those eyes, it all felt real. Too real. Before he could speak, another figure swept into the room. A woman with silver hair piled elegantly atop her head, eyes sharp and kind all at once. Her dress shimmered like frost, and her smile was mischievous. Well, don't just stand there gawking, she said, voice lilting like bells. Then, without warning, she pinched his backside. Nick yelped, leaping a foot in the air. What they? She laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a storm. Just making sure you're awake, darling. You looked like you were about to faint. Santa chuckled, beard shaking. Mrs. Claus has her own methods of hospitality. Nick rubbed his hip, cheeks burning. Hospitality? That's assault where I come from. Mrs. Claus winked. Oh, you'll survive. Nick sank into the nearest chair before his knees gave out. He stared at the two of them, trying to reconcile reality with whatever this was. Okay, he said slowly. Either I'm dreaming, or someone spiked my coffee. Santa's eyes twinkled brighter. Neither, my boy. You're here because we need your expertise. Nick blinked. Expertise? In what? Toy making? Efficiency, Santa said, settling into a chair that creaked under his weight. Our workshop is behind schedule. The world grows bigger, the lists longer, and our old ways can't keep up. We need modernization, safely, of course. Nick stared. You're telling me you want me to streamline Santa's workshop? Mrs. Claus perched on the arm of Santa's chair. Smiling like this was the most normal conversation in the world. That's exactly what we want. Nick laughed, sharp, incredulous. Do I need to sign an NDA or something? Santa roared with laughter, the sound booming through the room. An NDA? Oh, that's rich. No need, lad. No one would believe you. Nick imagined trying to explain this to anyone back home. Hey, I'm working for Santa now. 9-month contract. Improving elf productivity. He'd be locked in an asylum before he finished the sentence. He exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. Okay, he said finally. Fine, I'll do it. Because clearly, reality has left the building. Santa grinned, eyes twinkling like stars. Splendid. Tim will show you around. Nick frowned. Tim. As if on cue, a small figure popped up beside him. A cheerful elf with a shock of red hair, pointy hat askew, and a grin wide enough to split his face. Hiya, boss. Tim chirped. Ready for the grand tour? Nick stared at him, then at Santa, then at Mrs. Claus. He felt something shift inside him. A crack in the armor he'd worn for years. Because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about deadlines or spreadsheets. He was thinking about magic. Chapter 4. The tour. Nick wasn't sure what he expected when Tim said, grand tour. But it definitely wasn't stepping into a world that looked like someone had shaken a snow globe and then decided to live inside it. The corridor opened into a sprawling plaza, and Nick stopped dead in his tracks. Christmas Town wasn't just a workshop. It was an entire city, glittering under a sky so blue it looked painted. Candy cane lampposts lined cobblestone streets, their stripes gleaming like polished enamel. Strings of lights crisscrossed overhead, twinkling like stars caught in a net. Snow fell in lazy spirals, but the air was warm enough that Nick didn't shiver. It smelled like pine and sugar cookies, like nostalgia bottled and poured into the wind. Tim bounced ahead, boots crunching on the snow-dusted stones. "Welcome to the happiest place north of anywhere," he chirped, arms spread wide. "Population. Elves, reindeer, magic, and now you." Nick followed slowly, eyes darting everywhere. Shops with frosted windows displayed toys in every shape and size. Wooden trains, plush bears, drones that hovered lazily above shelves. A cocoa stand puffed steam into the air, the scent so rich Nick's stomach growled. Somewhere in the distance, bells chimed, and laughter floated like music. "This is insane," Nick muttered half to himself. "Like, clinically insane." Tim grinned up at him. "Insane is just another word for fun around here." Nick snorted. "Pretty sure that's not how Webster defines it." They passed a bakery where gingerbread men danced in the window. Actual dancing, arms swinging to a jaunty tune. Nick stopped, staring. "Are those?" "Yep," Tim said cheerfully. "Animated pastries. Don't eat the ones that sing, though. They get cranky." Nick shook his head, laughing under his breath. He felt lighter than he had in years, like someone had peeled off a layer of stress he didn't know he was carrying. Maybe it was the cocoa-scented air. Maybe it was the fact that magic was real and he was walking through it. The workshop itself was a marvel. A sprawling complex of brick and glass, humming with activity. Conveyor belts snaked through open spaces, carrying toys in various stages of assembly. Elves zipped between stations, their movements quick and practiced, though Nick couldn't help noticing the inefficiencies. Handwritten ledgers, manual sorting, processes that looked charming but screamed bottleneck. Tim noticed his frown. "Don't worry, boss. You'll fix all that, right?" Nick rubbed his jaw. "Yeah," he said slowly. "That's the plan." He was still scanning the room when a voice cut through the hum, a warm, lilting tone with just enough edge to make it interesting. "Careful, Henderson. If you start frowning this early, you'll scare the elves." Nick turned and forgot how to breathe. She stood near a towering stack of ledgers, a pen tucked behind one ear, dark hair pulled into a loose bun that looked like it had been done in a hurry but somehow worked. Her sweater was deep red, soft-looking, and her eyes, God, her eyes, were the color of hot cocoa, rich and warm, but sharp enough to slice through pretense. Nick blinked. "Ah!" She arched a brow, lips curving into a smile that wasn't entirely sweet. "Speechless? That's a first." Tim perked up. "Nick, meet Candace Allen, keeper of the naughty and nice list, master of numbers, breaker of hearts." Candace shot Tim a look that could curdle eggnog. "Ignore him," she said, stepping closer. "He thinks he's funny." Nick found his voice, though it came out rough. "You keep the list?" She shrugged, casual. "Someone has to. Santa's great at ho-ho-ho, but spreadsheets? Not so much." Nick laughed, surprised at how good it felt. "Fair enough." Candace tilted her head, studying him like he was a puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. "So you're the efficiency guy." "That's me," Nick said. "Streamlining processes, reducing risk, making sure nobody loses a finger in a toy press." "Romantic," she deadpanned. Nick grinned. "I like to think so." Her lips twitched, almost a smile. "Well, try not to ruin the magic while you're at it." Nick opened his mouth to reply, but Tim clapped his hands. "Tour's not over. Candy Cane Cafe next." Candace rolled her eyes. "Good luck, Henderson. You'll need it." Nick watched her walk away, the sway of her hips hypnotic, and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. A spark. Small, bright, and impossible to ignore. The Candy Cane Cafe was a riot of color and sugar. Peppermint-striped walls, tables shaped like snowflakes, and a cocoa fountain bubbling in the center like molten chocolate heaven. Nick sat at a booth while Tim ordered something called a North Pole Special, which turned out to be a mug of cocoa topped with whipped cream, sprinkles, and a candy cane big enough to double as a walking stick. Nick took a sip and groaned. "This is illegal." Tim grinned. "Best in the world. Literally." Nick leaned back, letting the warmth seep into him. He glanced out the window, where elves skated on a frozen pond, laughter ringing through the crisp air. For the first time in years, Nick wasn't thinking about deadlines or invoices. He was thinking about how good it felt to just be. And then he thought about Candace, her smile, her voice, the way she looked at him like she could see straight through his defenses. Nick wasn't sure if he was ready for whatever that was, but he knew one thing. He wanted to find out. As Tim dragged him toward the next stop, a reindeer stable that smelled like hay and cinnamon, Nick glanced back one last time. Candace was already bent over her ledgers, pen moving in quick strokes, but he could swear she felt his gaze. Because she looked up, met his eyes and smiled. A real smile this time, warm enough to melt the snow outside. Nick's heart thudded like a drum. Magic was real. And maybe, just maybe, so was possibility. Chapter 5. First day on the job. Nick woke to the sound of bells. Not the harsh clang of an alarm clock, but a soft, melodic chime that drifted through the cozy guest quarters like a whisper of snowflakes. For a moment, he lay still, staring at the carved wooden beams overhead, trying to remember where he was. Then it hit him, the plane, the snow, the town that looked like a Christmas card on steroids. And Santa Claus. Nick groaned, dragging a hand over his face. Right, he muttered. Not a dream, not a psychotic break. Just Tuesday. He dressed quickly. Flannel shirt, jeans, boots, and stepped outside into air so crisp it felt like biting into an apple. The town was already buzzing. Elves zipped along cobblestone streets, carrying boxes wrapped in shimmering paper. Reindeer trotted past, antlers gleaming with tiny lights. Somewhere, a choir sang carols in perfect harmony. Nick followed the path to the workshop, boots crunching on snow. His stomach fluttered, not nerves exactly, but something close. He was good at his job. He knew processes, safety, efficiency. But this was a factory powered by magic and nostalgia. How did you streamline something that ran on belief? Inside, the workshop was a symphony of chaos. Conveyor belts rattled, gears whirred, and elves darted between stations like caffeinated squirrels. Toys piled high on tables, dolls, drones, puzzles, plush animals, all waiting for finishing touches. It was charming, sure, but to Nick's trained eye, it was a disaster waiting to happen. He spotted 3 elves hauling a box twice their size, wobbling dangerously. Another was scribbling notes in a ledger so worn it looked older than Nick's grandmother. A line of half-assembled trains sat idle because the next station was clogged with teddy bears. Nick exhaled slowly. Okay, he murmured. Step 1. Don't panic. He pulled out his notebook, old school since tech was banned, and started jotting observations. Bottlenecks, redundant steps, safety hazards. He was halfway through a sketch of the conveyor layout when a voice sliced through the din. Well, look at you. Day 1 and already plotting world domination. Nick looked up and there she was. Candace Allen leaned against a support beam, arms crossed, eyes glinting like polished cocoa. Her sweater was green today, soft and snug, and her hair was down, tumbling over her shoulders in waves that made Nick's brain short-circuit for a second. He cleared his throat. Not world domination, he said. Just trying to make sure nobody gets flattened by a rogue teddy bear. Candace's lips curved. Good luck with that. Those bears have attitude. Nick grinned despite himself. I'll add that to the risk assessment. She pushed off the beam and strolled closer, her boots clicking softly on the polished floor. So, efficiency guy, what's the verdict? Nick glanced around. Honestly, it's a miracle this place hasn't imploded. Candace laughed, a warm, rich sound that curled around him like steam from a cocoa mug. That's the magic, Henderson. Chaos wrapped in tinsel. Magic doesn't prevent workplace injuries, Nick said dryly. Neither does overthinking. She shot back, eyes dancing. Nick chuckled, shaking his head. Touché. They walked together along the main assembly line, Candace pointing out stations while Nick scribbled notes. Every time their shoulders brushed, Nick felt a spark. Tiny, electric, impossible to ignore. He tried to focus on the job, but Candace made it hard. She was sharp, funny, and had a way of looking at him like she could see past the armor he wore. So, she said casually, what's your grand plan? Replace the elves with robots. Install scanners? Barcode the reindeer. Nick smirked. Tempting. But no. Just streamline. Reduce redundancies. Maybe introduce some ergonomic workstations. Candace arched a brow. Ergonomic? In a workshop run by magic. Magic doesn't fix back pain, Nick said. Trust me. She laughed again, and Nick felt something loosen inside him. A knot he hadn't realized was there. He liked her laugh. He liked her, period. Which was inconvenient because he was here for 9 months and then what? Back to his quiet apartment and predictable life? He shoved the thought aside. One problem at a time. By midday, Nick had a list of issues longer than Santa's gift roster. He sat at a corner table, sketching a revised layout, when Candace appeared with 2 steaming mugs. Fuel, she said, sliding one toward him. North Pole blend. Guaranteed to keep you from freezing or fainting. Nick took a sip and groaned. This is illegal. Candace smiled. Best cocoa in the world. Literally. Nick leaned back, letting the warmth seep into him. You know, he said slowly, I've worked in a lot of factories. Steel plants, automotive lines, even a brewery once. But this is something else. Candace tilted her head. Something good. Nick met her eyes. Yeah, he said softly. Something good. For a moment, the noise of the workshop faded. The clatter of gears, the chatter of elves, and it was just the 2 of them, sharing cocoa and something unspoken. Then Tim popped up like a jack-in-the-box. Hey boss, Santa wants an update. Nick sighed, dragging a hand over his face. Of course he does. Candace smirked. Better hurry. He gets cranky when he's kept waiting. Nick stood, grabbing his notebook. As he followed Tim toward Santa's office, he glanced back. Candace was watching him, eyes warm and bright, and when their gazes met, she smiled. A real smile. The kind that made Nick's chest ache in the best way. Magic was real. And maybe, just maybe, so was this. Chapter 6. The problem. Nick had expected quirks. He'd expected inefficiencies. What he hadn't expected was a ticking time bomb disguised in tinsel. By the end of his second full day in the workshop, his notebook looked like a crime scene. Pages crammed with diagrams, arrows, and notes scrawled in increasingly aggressive handwriting. The deeper he dug, the worse it got. Conveyor belts bottlenecked at every turn. Inventory tracking was practically medieval. And the biggest shock? Production was behind schedule. Way behind. Nick sat at a corner table, elbows braced, staring at the numbers Tim had reluctantly coughed up. "This can't be right," he muttered. "You're short by what, 20%? Tim winced, his pointy hat drooping like a guilty dog's ears. "Closer to 25, he admitted. "But hey, we've pulled off miracles before." Nick rubbed his temples. "Miracles aren't a strategy." Tim gave him a hopeful grin. "Magic is." Nick shot him a look. "Magic doesn't fix bottlenecks." Tim shrugged. "Depends on who you ask." Nick exhaled slowly, scanning the room. Elves zipped between stations, cheerful as ever. But Nick saw the cracks. The frantic pace, the cluttered workspaces, the way half-finished toys piled up like snowdrifts. If they didn't change something fast, Christmas Eve was going to be a disaster. He was still brooding over the numbers when a familiar voice cut through the din. "Oh, that's the face of a man about to ruin Christmas." Nick looked up and there she was, Candace Allen, leaning against a support beam like she owned the place, arms crossed, eyes glinting with amusement. Her sweater was white today, soft and snug, and her hair was pulled into a loose braid that made Nick's brain short-circuit for a second. He cleared his throat. "Not ruin," he said. "Save." Candace arched a brow. "Save? From what? Joy? Tradition? Fun?" Nick held up his notebook. "From imploding under its own inefficiencies." She strolled closer, boots clicking softly on the polished floor. "You really think you can fix this in 9 months?" "I know I can," Nick said, more confident than he felt. "But it's going to take changes." Candace tilted her head, studying him like he was a puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. "Changes," she repeated. "That's code for strip out everything magical and replace it with spreadsheets. Isn't it?" Nick grinned. "Spreadsheets are magical. They just don't sparkle." Candace laughed, a warm, rich sound that curled around him like steam from a cocoa mug. "You're serious." "Dead serious," Nick said. "If we don't streamline, you're looking at a Christmas catastrophe." Candace's smile faded, replaced by something sharper. "You know what happens when you start tinkering with magic, Henderson? You break things you can't fix." Nick met her gaze, steady. "And you know what happens when you ignore reality? You fail." For a moment, they just stared at each other, tension crackling like static. Around them, elves bustled, oblivious to the silent battle brewing in the middle of the workshop. Finally, Candace spoke, voice low. "You really think efficiency matters more than wonder?" Nick hesitated, just for a second, then said, "I think they can coexist. But if we don't adapt, wonder won't matter. Because there won't be a Christmas to celebrate." Candace's eyes softened, but only slightly. "You're not wrong," she admitted. "But don't forget why this place exists. It's not about numbers. It's about magic." Nick nodded slowly. "Then let's find a way to keep both." They spent the rest of the afternoon in a strange dance. Nick sketching layouts, Candace countering with tradition. Both of them circling the same truth. They needed each other. Nick had the systems. Candace had the soul. And somewhere between conveyor belts and cocoa breaks, sparks flew, bright, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. When the bell chimed for evening cocoa, Nick realized 2 things. 1, he was in way over his head, and 2, he didn't mind at all. Chapter 7. The spark. The snowstorm rolled in like a curtain, thick flakes swirling against the windows of the Candy Cane Cafe. Outside, Christmas Town shimmered under a blanket of white, lampposts glowing like candles in the dark. Inside, warmth wrapped around Nick like a woolen blanket, fire crackling in the hearth, cocoa fountains bubbling, the scent of peppermint and cinnamon curling through the air. Nick sat in a corner booth nursing a mug of cocoa so decadent it should have come with a warning label. He'd planned to review his notes, maybe sketch a revised layout for the assembly lines, but the storm had other ideas. The elves had scurried home hours ago, leaving the cafe quiet except for the occasional pop of the fire. He was halfway through a sip when the door swung open, bells jingling softly, and Candace Allen stepped inside. Nick's pulse did something stupid. She shook snow from her hair, cheeks flushed pink from the cold, and scanned the room until her gaze landed on him. For a second, Nick thought about pretending he hadn't seen her, then immediately decided that was the dumbest idea he'd ever had. Candace crossed the room, boots clicking softly on the polished floor, and slid into the booth opposite him. "Looks like we're stuck," she said, breath puffing in the warm air. "Storm's not letting up anytime soon." Nick managed to smile. "Guess I'll have to cancel my evening plans." Candace arched a brow. "Plans? Henderson, you've been here 3 days. What plans?" Nick grinned. "Sketching conveyor belts counts as a social life, right?" She laughed, a warm, rich sound that curled around him like steam from her cocoa mug. You're hopeless. Occupational hazard, Nick said. Efficiency guys aren't known for being fun. Candace tilted her head, studying him like she was peeling back layers. You don't strike me as boring. Nick blinked. That sounded almost like a compliment. Don't get used to it, she said, but her lips curved into a smile that wasn't entirely teasing. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the storm whispering against the windows. Nick watched the firelight dance across her face, turning her eyes into molten chocolate, and felt something shift inside him, a crack in the armor he'd worn for years. So, Candace said, breaking the quiet, why'd you take the job? Nick hesitated, fingers tracing the rim of his mug. Honestly, I needed a change. My life back home, it was fine, comfortable, but it felt like I was running on autopilot. Candace nodded slowly. I get that. Nick glanced up. You do. She shrugged, gaze drifting to the window. I came here 4 years ago. I was working in finance, big city, big paycheck, zero joy. Then I got an offer I couldn't explain and I said yes. Nick smiled faintly. And now you manage Santa's naughty and nice list. Candace laughed softly. Yeah, weird, right? But it feels good. Like I'm part of something that matters. Nick studied her, the way her voice softened on that last word. Belonging. He knew that ache, the hollow space where connection should be. He'd filled it with work, deadlines, promotions, but none of it stuck. Do you ever miss it? He asked quietly. The old life. Candace met his eyes, and for a moment, the teasing vanished. Not for a second. The silence stretched, warm and easy, until Candace leaned forward, elbows on the table. So, efficiency guy, she said, voice lighter now. What's your grand plan for saving Christmas? Nick smirked. Step 1. Convince you I'm not the enemy. Candace's lips twitched. Good luck with that. Nick grinned. I'm persistent. Her eyes sparkled, and Nick felt the spark between them flare, bright, undeniable. He wanted to reach across the table, tuck that loose strand of hair behind her ear, feel the warmth of her skin. He didn't, but the thought lingered, sweet and dangerous. Outside, the storm held. Inside, Nick realized 2 things. 1, he was in way over his head, and 2, he didn't mind at all. Chapter 8. The mishap. Nick had been warned by Tim, by Candace, even by Santa himself, that magic didn't always play nice with modernization. He'd listened, nodded, and then done what he always did. Built a plan, checked the numbers, and trusted the process. The process betrayed him. It started innocently enough. Nick had spent the past week implementing a new workflow, a streamlined system that rerouted toy assembly lines to reduce congestion. It was elegant, efficient, and, on paper, flawless. He'd even color-coded the diagrams, which Tim had called pretty enough to frame. By mid-morning, the new system was live. Conveyor belts hummed in synchronized rhythm. Elves zipped between stations with purpose, and Nick felt a surge of pride. For the first time since he arrived, the workshop looked orderly. Then the music stopped. Literally. The cheerful carols piping through the speakers cut off mid-verse, replaced by an ominous silence. Nick frowned, scanning the room. Conveyor belts slowed, then shuddered to a halt. Elves froze mid-step, clutching half-assembled toys. Somewhere in the distance, a cocoa fountain sputtered and died. Tim appeared at Nick's elbow, eyes wide. Boss? I think we broke Christmas. Nick's stomach dropped. What happened? Tim gestured helplessly. Everything's stuck. Like, magically stuck. Nick swore under his breath and sprinted to the control panel, a gleaming brass console that looked like it belonged in a steampunk novel. He flipped switches, pressed buttons, even gave the emergency lever a good yank. Nothing. The belts sat motionless, toys piled high like snowdrifts, and elves began whispering in panicked tones. Nick dragged a hand through his hair. Okay, it's fine. We'll troubleshoot. Troubleshoot magic? Tim squeaked. Good luck with that. Nick ignored him, scanning the system diagram. The reroute should have worked. It was simple logic, reduce bottlenecks, increase flow. But logic didn't account for enchantments woven into every gear and bolt. He'd disrupted something fundamental, and now the entire operation was frozen. Nice work, Henderson. Nick turned, and there she was. Candace Allen, arms crossed, eyes glinting like polished cocoa. Her tone was sharp, but her lips twitched like she was fighting a smile. Nick groaned. Not helping, Allen. Oh, I'm helping, she said, striding closer. Helping you realize that magic doesn't care about your spreadsheets. Nick shot her a look. You think I don't know that? Candace smirked. You know it now. Nick exhaled hard, resisting the urge to bang his head against the console. Fine, you win. Now help me fix this before Santa finds out. Candace's brows lifted. Santa already knows. He's in his office stress-eating gingerbread. Nick winced. Great. Candace slid into the space beside him, scanning the panel with quick, practiced eyes. What did you change? Routing, Nick said. I rerouted the belts to reduce congestion. Candace tapped a finger against the brass. Routing affects flow. Flow affects enchantment. Enchantment affects, Well, everything. Nick stared. You're saying I broke the magic plumbing. Basically, Candace said, lips curving. Congratulations. Nick groaned again. Okay. So how do we fix it? Candace's smile turned sly. We improvise. The next hour was chaos wrapped in comedy. Nick and Candace crawled under conveyor belts, waded through piles of plush bears, and argued over everything from gear ratios to spell harmonics. At one point, Nick ended up flat on his back with a wrench in one hand and a candy cane in the other, while Candace leaned over him, braids swinging like a pendulum. Don't look at me like that, she said, smirking. Nick blinked. Like what? Like you're wondering if I'm enjoying this. Nick grinned despite himself. Are you? Candace's eyes sparkled. Maybe. By the time the belts roared back to life, Nick was covered in grease and glitter. Candace had a smudge of cocoa on her cheek, and the elves were cheering like they'd just won the North Pole Cup. Nick slumped against the console, exhausted but grinning. Candace handed him a mug of cocoa, her fingers brushing his as she passed it. Not bad, efficiency guy. Nick met her gaze, something warm and dangerous curling in his chest. Couldn't have done it without you. Candace smiled. A real smile, bright enough to rival the twinkling lights overhead. Remember that next time you try to outsmart magic. Nick chuckled, lifting his mug in salute. Deal. As the workshop hummed back to life, Nick realized two things. One, he'd just survived his first North Pole disaster. And two, every time Candace smiled at him like that, he forgot why he ever thought his old life was enough. Chapter 9. The Christmas Festival. Christmas Town didn't do anything halfway. If Nick had learned that in the past few weeks, tonight was the proof. The festival was a full-blown spectacle of light, sound, and sugar. The plaza glittered under a canopy of twinkling lights, strung like stars across the deep winter sky. Snowflakes drifted lazily, catching the glow of lanterns shaped like ornaments. Music floated through the air, cheerful carols with a jazzy twist, and the scent of cinnamon and roasted chestnuts curled around every corner. Elves darted between stalls, laughter ringing like bells, while reindeer pranced in the distance, antlers crowned with garlands. Nick stood at the edge of the crowd, boots crunching on snow, and tried not to look like a man completely out of his depth. He'd been to company holiday parties before, awkward affairs with stale cookies and forced cheer, but this was magic incarnate. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like an outsider. Enjoying yourself? A voice teased behind him. Nick turned, and there she was. Candace Allen looked like Christmas personified. Her dress was deep green, soft and flowing, cinched at the waist with a ribbon that shimmered under the lights. Her hair tumbled in loose waves, catching snowflakes like tiny diamonds, and her smile, God, that smile, was warm enough to melt the frost on his jacket. Nick swallowed. You clean up nice. Candace arched a brow. You're not so bad yourself, Henderson. Nick glanced down at his outfit, dark sweater, jeans, boots, and smirked. This is me at my fanciest. Candace laughed, the sound curling around him like cocoa steam. Come on, she said, tugging his sleeve. Dance floors this way. Nick blinked. Dance floor? Before he could protest, she was leading him through the crowd, weaving past elves carrying trays of peppermint bark and mugs of cocoa. The music swelled as they reached the center of the plaza, where couples twirled under strings of lights, boots sliding on packed snow. Nick hesitated, heart thudding like a drum. I don't dance, he said. Candace's eyes sparkled. Then tonight's a good night to start. She slipped her hand into his, warm and sure, and Nick felt something inside him crack wide open. He let her guide him into the rhythm, clumsy at first, then steadier as her laughter smoothed the edges of his nerves. The world narrowed to the glow of lights, the brush of her fingers, the music curling like smoke through the cold night air. You're not terrible, Candace said, lips curving. Nick grinned. High praise. She laughed again, and Nick thought he could live on that sound forever. They moved slowly now, swaying to a softer tune. Candace's head tilted toward him, her breath warm against his cheek, and Nick felt the spark between them flare, bright, dangerous, undeniable. He wanted to close the distance, taste the cocoa on her lips, feel her melt against him. And then, boss, a voice squeaked. Emergency. Nick jerked back as Tim the elf skidded onto the dance floor, hat askew, eyes wide. We've got a cocoa fountain overflow. It's a chocolate tsunami. Candace groaned. Of course. Nick bit back a laugh. Duty calls? Candace sighed, but her eyes danced. Always. As they hurried toward the chaos, Tim babbling about cocoa geysers and elves surfing on candy canes. Nick realized two things. One, Christmas Town was never boring. And two, if he didn't kiss Candace soon, he was going to lose his mind. Chapter 10. The deadline, the countdown had begun. Nick stood in the heart of the workshop, surrounded by a storm of motion. Elves darting between stations, conveyor belts humming like a well-oiled machine, and the air thick with the scent of peppermint and urgency. Christmas Eve was less than 48 hours away, and despite the cocoa fountain fiasco and the rerouting disaster, they were close. So close, but not close enough. Nick scanned his notebook, jaw tight. We're still behind, he muttered. If we don't hit quota by midnight tomorrow, we will, Candace said firmly, appearing at his side like a force of nature. Her braid swung over her shoulder, her cheeks flushed from hours of work, and her eyes burned with determination. We always do. Nick looked at her, really looked, and felt something twist in his chest. She wasn't just confident. She was fearless. And God help him, he wanted to kiss her more than he wanted oxygen. Instead, he shoved the thought aside and focused on the numbers. We need to double output on the final assembly line. Candace scanned the floor, then nodded. We can reroute the overflow to Station 12. Tim's crew can handle it. Nick grinned. You're starting to sound like an efficiency expert. Candace smirked. Don't get used to it. They worked side by side for hours, moving like a team that had been doing this for years. Nick adjusted conveyor speeds while Candace coordinated elf rotations with military precision. When a gear jammed, they fixed it together. Nick's hands steady on the wrench, Candace's fingers brushing his as she held the bolt in place. Every touch sent sparks skittering up his spine, but neither of them said a word. By evening, the workshop hummed like a symphony. Toys flowed down the belts in perfect rhythm. Elves cheered as quotas ticked upward, and Nick felt something he hadn't felt in years. Pride. Not just in the work, but in the people, the magic that made it possible. And in her. Not bad, Henderson, Candace said, wiping a streak of glitter from her cheek. You might just save Christmas. Nick grinned, exhaustion tugging at his muscles. Couldn't have done it without you. Candace's smile softened, and for a moment, the noise faded. The clatter of gears, the chatter of elves, and it was just the two of them, standing in a glow of twinkling lights. Then a deep, rolling laugh broke the spell. Ho ho ho, look at you two. Santa Claus strode toward them, beard gleaming, eyes twinkling like stars. I knew you'd make a fine team. Nick chuckled. We're getting there. Santa clapped him on the shoulder, nearly knocking him off balance. You've done more than get there, lad. You've brought order to chaos, and joy to my elves. Nick flushed, unsure what to say. Santa's gaze softened, and his voice dropped to something almost gentle. Efficiency is important, he said, but so is wonder. And love, Nick. Don't forget that. Nick blinked. Love. Santa's eyes twinkled brighter. Magic isn't just in the toys, my boy. It's in the people who believe, and in the hearts that find each other. Nick swallowed hard, pulse thudding like a drum. He glanced at Candace, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read, warm, curious, maybe even hopeful. Santa winked. Now finish strong, and then follow your heart. As Santa strode away, Nick stood frozen, Santa's words echoing in his head. Love, hearts, magic. He'd come here to fix a factory, not his life. But somewhere between conveyor belts and cocoa breaks, something had changed, and Nick wasn't sure he wanted to change it back. Chapter 11. The confession. The workshop was quiet for the first time in weeks. Christmas Eve had dawned crisp and clear, the sky a pale sweep of winter blue. Outside, elves bustled through the final preparations, laughter ringing like bells. But inside the assembly hall, the chaos had settled into a hum of calm efficiency. The belts were running smoothly, the quotas met, and Nick Henderson, efficiency guy, skeptic turned believer, stood in the glow of twinkling lights feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Peace, and something else, something that made his chest ache in the best way. Candace was across the room, perched on a stool with a ledger balanced on her knee, hair tumbling in loose waves that caught the light like spun gold. She looked tired, everyone did, but there was a spark in her eyes, a quiet joy that made Nick's pulse trip over itself. He'd been rehearsing the words all day, hell all week. Every time he tried to say them, something had interrupted. A cocoa geyser, a gear jam, Tim popping up like a caffeinated jack-in-the-box. But now, with the workshop bathed in soft light and the world outside wrapped in snow, there were no excuses left. Nick crossed the floor, boots crunching softly on sawdust, and stopped in front of her. Hey. Candace glanced up, lips curving into a smile that hit him like a punch. Hey yourself. We did it. Nick nodded, throat tight. Yeah, we did. She closed the ledger, setting it aside. So what's next for you, Henderson? Back to the real world. Nick swallowed hard. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. Candace tilted her head, curiosity flickering in her eyes. Oh. Nick dragged a hand through his hair, searching for words that didn't sound like a bad rom-com script. When I came here, I thought it was just a job. 9 months, fix some processes, go home. But somewhere between conveyor belts and cocoa breaks, something changed. Candace's smile softened. Something? Nick met her gaze, heart pounding like a drum. You. Candace, He broke off, exhaling hard. I like you. More than I should, probably. And I don't want this to end when the contract does. For a heartbeat, silence stretched between them, warm and fragile. Then Candace stood, closing the distance until she was so close he could feel the heat of her skin, smell the faint sweetness of peppermint clinging to her hair. You're late, she murmured. Nick blinked. Late? Her smile turned mischievous. I've been waiting for you to say that for weeks. Nick laughed, sharp, incredulous, relieved. And then she was in his arms, her lips soft and warm against his, and the world tilted on its axis. The kiss was slow, sweet, and everything he hadn't known he needed. When they broke apart, breathless, Candace rested her forehead against his. "So," she whispered, "what's the plan, efficiency guy?" Nick grinned, heart soaring. "Step 1. Never let you go." Candace laughed, and Nick thought he could live on that sound forever. Outside, snow fell like confetti, and somewhere in the distance, Santa's laughter rolled through the night, deep, jolly, and full of magic. Chapter 12. Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve in Christmastown was not a quiet affair. The plaza shimmered under a canopy of lights, brighter than any city skyline Nick had ever seen. Snowflakes drifted lazily, catching the glow of lanterns shaped like ornaments. Music floated through the air, carols layered with laughter, and the scent of cinnamon and roasted chestnuts curled around every corner. Elves darted between stalls, their pointy hats bobbing as they carried trays of peppermint bark and mugs of cocoa. Reindeer pranced in the distance, antlers crowned with garlands, while sleigh bells chimed like silver laughter. Nick stood at the edge of the crowd, boots crunching on snow, and tried to absorb it all. The past 9 months had been a blur of conveyor belts, cocoa breaks, and chaos wrapped in tinsel. And now, here he was, watching Santa Claus himself prepare for the biggest delivery run in history. Santa strode through the plaza like a king in crimson, beard gleaming, eyes twinkling brighter than the lights overhead. Elves cheered as he climbed into the sleigh, its golden runners gleaming under the moonlight. 8 reindeer pawed the snow, antlers glittering with frost, and Nick felt a surge of awe so sharp it stole his breath. Magic was real. He'd seen it, touched it, lived it. And tonight, it was about to soar across the sky. "Enjoying the view?" a voice teased behind him. Nick turned, and there she was. Candace Allen looked like every Christmas dream he'd ever had. Her dress was deep red, soft and flowing, cinched at the waist with a ribbon that shimmered under the lights. Her hair tumbled in loose waves, catching snowflakes like tiny diamonds, and her smile, God, that smile, was warm enough to melt the frost on his jacket. Nick swallowed hard. "You're stunning." Candace arched a brow, lips curving. "You're not so bad yourself, Henderson." Nick glanced down at his outfit, dark sweater, jeans, boots, and smirked. "This is me at my fanciest." Candace laughed, the sound curling around him like cocoa steam. "Come on," she said, tugging his sleeve. "There's something you need to see." She led him through the crowd, weaving past elves singing carols and stalls piled high with sugar-dusted pastries. They stopped beneath an archway draped in holly and twinkling lights. Nick looked up and froze. Mistletoe, dangling from a ribbon, swaying gently in the winter breeze. Candace's eyes sparkled. "North Pole tradition," she murmured. Nick's pulse thudded like a drum. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," she said, stepping closer until he could feel the heat of her skin, smell the faint sweetness of peppermint clinging to her hair. "Unless you're scared." Nick grinned, heart soaring. Not even a little. And then he kissed her. Slow, sweet, and everything he hadn't known he needed. The world tilted on its axis, lights blurring into stars, music fading into a hum of magic. When they broke apart, breathless, Candace rested her forehead against his, her smile soft and radiant. "About time," she whispered. Nick laughed, joy bubbling up like champagne. "Worth the wait, boss," a voice squeaked. "Emergency." Nick groaned as Tim skidded into view, hat askew, eyes wide. "We've got a gingerbread riot. They're staging a coup in the bakery." Candace sighed, but her eyes danced. "Of course." Nick chuckled, pressing a quick kiss to her temple. "Duty calls." Candace grinned. "Always." As they hurried toward the chaos, Tim babbling about militant cookies and frosting barricades, Nick realized 2 things. 1, Christmastown was never boring. And 2, he wasn't going back to his old life. Not now. Not ever. Outside, Santa's sleigh soared into the night, bells chiming like laughter, and Nick felt something settle deep in his bones. A truth as bright as the stars overhead. Magic was real, and so was love. Chapter 13. A new beginning. The snow fell in soft, lazy spirals, blanketing Christmastown in a hush that felt almost sacred. The festival had wound down, the music fading into memory, and the plaza now glowed with the gentle light of lanterns strung like stars across the night sky. Nick walked slowly, boots crunching on fresh powder, Candace's hand warm in his. For the first time in years, Nick wasn't thinking about deadlines or invoices or the next contract. He wasn't thinking about efficiency ratios or safety audits. He was thinking about her. The way her fingers curled around his, the way her laughter lingered like music in his chest, the way her smile made the world tilt on its axis. Candace glanced up at him, eyes bright under the glow of twinkling lights. "You're quiet," she said softly. Nick smiled, just taking it in. All of this. She gestured to the snow-draped rooftops, the candy cane lampposts, the distant hum of elves still tidying up after the festival. Nick shook his head. "You." Her breath caught, and for a moment, the world narrowed to the warmth between them. the hush of falling snow, the magic humming in the air like a heartbeat. They stopped at the edge of the plaza, where a towering evergreen stood crowned with a star that shimmered like liquid gold. Nick turned to face her, heart thudding like a drum. "I was supposed to leave after tonight," he said quietly. "Go back to my apartment, my old life. But the truth is," he swallowed hard, searching for words that didn't sound like a bad rom-com script. "I don't want to." Candace's eyes softened, her fingers tightening around his. "Nick, I came here to fix a factory," he said, voice rough. "But somewhere along the way, I realized something was broken in me. And you," he broke off, exhaling hard. "You fixed it." For a heartbeat, silence stretched between them, warm and fragile. Then Candace smiled, a smile so bright it could melt glaciers, and stepped closer until her breath mingled with his. "Good," she whispered, "because I wasn't ready to let you go." Nick laughed, joy bubbling up like champagne, and pulled her into his arms. The kiss was slow, sweet, and full of promise. A promise that this wasn't an ending, but a beginning. Above them, the star gleamed brighter, and somewhere in the distance, Santa's laughter rolled through the night, deep, jolly, and full of magic. Nick didn't need a sleigh or a sack of toys to know the truth. He'd found his Christmas miracle, and he wasn't letting it go.